That's all right. Good. I think we're coming in now. Great. Well, good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm just going to bear me a second. I'm just going to mute myself. Just going to do that very quickly. Okay, good. So great. Hi, everybody. Please say hi as you're coming in. I can see people coming in already. Well, we've got a real treat tonight. I'm really looking forward to this. We've got the wonderful Meesh Masters joining us.
Hello.
Hi, Meesh.
Hello.
We must mention your Christmas tree because it's an all year round. It's an all year round. We haven't gone early. It's because it's there all the time, isn't it?
All the time.
Yeah, that's how I'd like to. Oh, hi, Shay.
Hi.
Yeah, that's how I'd like to have it. You know, me and Kieran, you might know we're big Christmas fans. We've got some friends who really celebrate Halloween, so we kind of think, well, we'll let them do their Halloween thing first, and then we'll go really Christmas nuts after that. Well, hi everybody. Hi Laura. Hi Shay. Hi Mary. Hi Lizzie. Hi Deb. Great to see you. They're all piling in now, which is great. So we're going to be talking about overseas rescues tonight, and that's your speciality, of course, Meesh. And there's a lot of things for us to unpack and talk about together. And I know there's a lot of people who have joined the group actually from various different places, not just from your own wonderful group, because they know about this conversation tonight. So it's going to be a really important one, I think. But let's start off as we always do. We'll kind of dive straight in a mo, but let's hear a little bit about your own background into working with dogs then, Meesh, and especially how you ended up having this real purpose-driven approach to working with overseas rescue specifically.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to come along. I feel very honoured. I feel a little bit like a minnow that's accidentally found its way into the big koi carp pond.
Oh no! Well, you know, you've been on my radar for a long time to get you in, Meesh. I know. You're definitely in with the. We're all the same fish. So that's
yeah. So my original journey into actually becoming studying to become a trainer and working in behavior started with a fear-driven aggression that I encountered in a rescue dog just probably about 25 years ago now. I'd had dogs all my life up to that point, German Shepherds, and I'd had all sorts of problems, and I thought I knew, you know, a decent amount about dogs, as you do, but this was well outside of my skill set. And I hired a trainer behaviorist at the time to come and help me with this girl. She'd just not seen the world at all. She was terrified of everything, and she was displaying fear aggression towards people in the home. And at the time I had a young child and whatnot. And these guys came, and you know, they brought their liver cake, but they also brought their slip lead, and their kind of approach was to force her. They wanted to force her outside and then give her liver cake. And she was obviously resisting. She was not happy. She was terrified. And I just said, like, no, stop. You can't do this with her. And we kind of stopped that, and off they went. And I decided to start reading myself to try and find ways, learning more so that I could help her. And I never stopped. That was it. I kind of got well into it, and then I started studying, and then I studied courses and became obviously a trainer behaviorist. And that was my journey into training from her, bless her heart. I wish I knew then what I know now, because I could have helped her so much more, but we don't know what we don't know, and all that. So yeah, that was my journey into training. And I'd actually been doing, you know, training and behavior, and I'd done the whole group classes, and I used to host in-person workshops and all of that stuff over, you know, the course of 10 years. I worked behavior cases, quite a lot of, you know, general reactivity to dogs and things like that. So, you know, I would have classed myself as having a decent level of experience, if you like. Well, I wouldn't say I was, you know, all knowledgeable at all. And then along came the Romanian dogs, and I got a little bit duped into them. I was asked to share, I didn't know anything about them, and I was asked to share this particular dog that was in a public shelter. And obviously they only have a certain amount of time before they're killed. And a good friend of mine knew that I had a business page, obviously connected with dogs, and could I share this dog on the page to see if they could find someone who would be interested in fostering him or adopting him. And he was a stunning dog. You'll see his pictures, or you'll have seen his pictures all over my website, Merlin. Absolutely stunning, like blonde shepherd. He was just beautiful, and the picture just grabs your heart. So of course I was like, yeah, no problem at all, I'll share it. And then obviously down the rabbit hole I went of finding out what the situation was and looking into what was going on and things like that. And over the course of the next few weeks, I shared his picture and I was talking to her. She actually had adopted a Romanian dog, so she was obviously telling me about it. And then she popped up again and said, you know, he's only got like a couple of days. Would I be able to foster him? And obviously knowing what I know, I only had one dog by that time, and I couldn't think of a good enough reason to say no. I was like, well, I can really, you know, I can offer this dog a lifeline. So obviously I said, yes, I'll take him. And I remember driving to collect him. And I was like, what am I doing? I know better than this. I'm driving to pick up this dirty grey shepherd that I know nothing about. I don't know what he's going to be like when he arrives. What am I doing? But anyway, along came Merlin, and he actually never put a paw wrong. He was an incredible dog, absolutely incredible. Probably one of the easiest dogs I've ever had in my own home, to be fair. Unfortunately, Sky was not comfortable with him, which I'd already said up front. I said, I'll foster him because I'm pretty sure my border collie will not feel happy. And she was very, very wary of him. He never did anything to justify it, but she would like tiptoe around the edge of the room and things like that. But he was such a good boy. But anyway, he got adopted, which was great. And he's still there now. And that was it. I was kind of hooked. And going on from there, obviously I'm now in the thick of all the rescuers posts and seeing what was going on out there and hearing more and learning more and everything like that. And there were puppies in the shelter that were dying, literally just from cold. And I couldn't bear it. I'd get up in the morning, there'd be another post. It was like, we lost another couple of puppies. And I was like, oh my God, this is awful. So I just said, just send me a puppy. I don't care what it is, just send me a puppy to help, save a life, basically, I guess. I ended up taking 2 puppies. That's another story. And along came Tramp. He was a foster dog who obviously never left. And then it was from him that I really then started to find out about how different these dogs really were, if you like, through obviously him staying and me starting to work with him and do all the stuff I normally do. I mean, since becoming, a trainer and working as a trainer and doing behavior consultations, the dogs I'd had since that point were just amazing. My knowledge, because of what I'd learned, they were just great. And then along came Tramp and nothing seemed to work at all. I was like, okay, I didn't feel like I had a relationship with him. I felt like he just kind of flipped me the finger quite a lot whenever I was trying to build this relationship and do all the stuff and things that I would normally do. I was like, this just isn't working. And then that was when I just stopped everything and really sat back and started to unpick who he was, basically, how he perceived the world, how the world impacted on him and, his responses to it. And I kind of realized that it was different. He was different, and who he was different, and how he responded to things and the way things affected him was different. And also how I worked with him needed to be different. And then I kind of embarked on this incredible journey of learning about him and, subsequently all the dogs that have come after him in terms of the dogs that came to the house and also clients that I worked with. And it became apparent quite quickly once I stopped and took a step back and started looking at it properly. It became apparent that they were different. These dogs were different to, all the dogs I'd known, the British dogs. And therefore they needed a different approach. But no one was talking about it. So obviously at this time, so we're going back now 8-9 years, the escalation of dogs being imported was starting to build. And the dogs were coming over, but no one was telling anybody that these dogs were different, or that they kind of needed a different approach, or, supporting them as such and supporting the people, the families that they were being adopted into. So I started writing articles and explaining stuff and just trying to get stuff out there to kind of get the point across. And basically it's just grown from there.
Well, thank you, story, and to see, it is such a humbling experience when you get that dog, isn't it? With that one dog who's like,
Amazing.
you're gonna have to rethink things because your version of safety might not be mine, or whatever that
No,
story is. You know.
no.
How did you find, going back, we'll come on to some specifics and kind of really kind of dig into all that, because I think there's a lot of things we need to look at here. But going back along then, when you started writing those articles and you were putting forward some of these observations and saying, look, you know, we need to rethink how we do things. Did you find that people were really accepting of that straight away, or were people like, no, that it's a dog, or yeah, you do the same kind of thing and you'll get the same kind of results?
The majority of people who obviously came across the information, or, you know, that I obviously shared it on social media and on my websites and things, the majority of people were like, oh yeah, yeah. And it really did then start to make sense to them. There were people, and there still are people, who will say to me, they're no different. They are absolutely no different. But they are. And I know thousands of people who, you know, who will say they are different.
It must have been a relief, especially for caregivers, I think, who already recognise, hang on, they've probably already gone through that bit in their mind. We're thinking, what have I let myself in for here? You know, because this is different. And even if they'd had dogs all their life, which is how we tend to frame things, they hadn't had one quite like this. And I think to hear a voice come through and say, it's not you. You know, it's nothing you've done. It's because there are different bridges of communication that we need to kind of create here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that did actually come up quite a lot, as obviously I started to talk about it more and get more involved with people who had adopted these dogs. I set up my community Facebook group, which has got nearly 10,000 people in it now. That actual statement came up an awful lot, and still does, to be fair. People who had dogs their whole lives, and difficult dogs as well, rescue dogs, difficult dogs, dogs with issues, you know, reactivity, resource guarding, you know, all the difficult issues, if you like, they'd had those dogs before, and they were coming to me and saying, but this one's different.
Yeah. And I guess you almost need to give them permission to recognize that difference and to go against the grain a little bit, because I know my dear friend Tess, who's got Kratu, and
oh yeah, Tess and Kratu, they're lovely.
Yeah, I remember I had the absolute joy of meeting Kratu at Crufts last year, and Tess, we managed to go and sneak off and have a cup of coffee together and stuff, and it's just hearing that, you know, Tess doesn't mind me mentioning this, but I think, you know, she knows her dogs, she knows them, she's connected to them on a very deep level.
Absolutely.
And how frustrating it is when other people who don't know that story want to try and give you, you know, to tell you stuff. It's tricky. And I think there's a lot of my clients, especially when we're working with these cases, we have to really hold hands a little bit and allow them and support them to kind of to do the advocacy they need, regardless of what other people keep trying to tell them.
Absolutely. And that again comes up an awful lot. Do you know, people posting in the group and commenting in the group, and they'll say, I am so glad that I've read this, or that you've written this, because this is what I've been trying to do, but that they're getting this push from all different sides, and yet they're trying to hold their ground. But it is hard when, you know, friends and family are coming at you and saying that dog needs to be going for a walk, and and this dog's like still in the corner going, I don't even know what's happening. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really powerful thing for us to be able to support those people in that frame of saying, it's absolutely fine. This is what your dog needs, and you are doing great. And I've had many phone calls with people who have got really emotional with relief of hearing that and knowing that, you know, it's okay to be doing that for their dogs.
And I think it's similar to parents who have children with different kind of learning styles, different outlooks, different challenges. You know, when you've got a kind of a conformist norm around you that is trying to kind of get them to kind of be in a different way. And like you've said, we'll unpack some of this a little bit more about how, you know, many of these dogs are literally wired differently, and it is differently, not worse. They're not broken. They're not.
No.
It's just different because
Definitely
of their own experiences. So I think we'll start off with let's start off with a little bit of myth busting, I guess. And that's one thing to think about. And what are some things that you think we need to really be mindful of when we're thinking about overseas rescue? Some of the stereotypical views that people might have when they think about an overseas rescue that we can perhaps rethink.
I think the two things that I would say up front, kind of before we dig deeper into a lot of other stuff, is one, that there are no sweeping statements. I mean, as we know, there are no sweeping statements within what we do anyway, but there are definitely no sweeping statements in terms of, you know, when I talk about these dogs, it is every single one of them is very unique, very individual, and we can't make sweeping statements. It's really important not to do that and to say, well, this is how they are, or this is what they're like, or this is what they'll do or not do, or anything like that. I've had many people in the group, you know, their dogs are on the, you know, coming to them within the next couple of weeks, and how can they set themselves up to get it right, which is fantastic that they're thinking along those lines, but it's impossible to say until they actually arrive. You can put things in place, but there's no way of saying this is what you'll do, because you just don't know how that dog is going to land when it arrives. But also, I think it's important to remember that these dogs they're incredible teachers. They have an awful lot to share with us. And it's really, really important that we take that time to stop and listen to what they have to say, and to listen to how they communicate to us, how they are affected by the things around us, because despite anything that may have gone on before, what you see now is it's not even just about seeing the dog in front of you, it's seeing that dog in front of you right now. I know lots and lots of people who have chosen their dogs, if you like, and they see them in the shelters, and they see this dog, it's bouncing around, it's surrounded by other dogs, it's jumping up at its people, the rescuers and things like that. And then the dog arrives and it's a completely different dog. And it's important to understand the impact, obviously, of what happens to them. But also the fact that no matter what's gone on before, what's going on now, this is what matters. This is what you deal with as such. Yes, this can be helpful to understand, but what's happening in front of you is what you need to kind of focus on. In terms of myth busting, I think there is a lot of people kind of tend to assume that these dogs have trauma. They kind of automatically have trauma, or they have abuse, or they're feral, things like that, which some of them absolutely do. Some of them are, but certainly not all of them, and probably not the majority of them. And many of them have had homes. You know, I've had at least two. I mean, the two puppies were slightly different because they were in the shelter, then in a home before they came to me. But at least two of the dogs that I fostered they definitely had been in a home. And I know many people who will, you know, their dogs will come in and settle so well, there is no way they can have not been in a home before to be able to just deal with, you know, all the stuff that we have in a home. But at this, you know, at the other end of the scale, there are dogs who definitely have been abused and have had trauma and have got, you know, had that traumatic experience of being on the streets, fending for themselves, dealing with, you know, abuse from people whilst living on the streets. So it's very dangerous, I think, to make those sweeping statements of they've all been abused, they've all got trauma, they're all a bit feral. They're not feral. Some of them might be. Again, careful with the sweeping statement. Some of them might be, but the majority of them are a lot more. Their instinctive traits are a lot closer to the surface than the majority of people are used to, and that's where things can get tripped up, especially in the realms of communication. A lot of people don't have necessarily the really finely tuned skills to read those dogs, and they are quite literal often in their communications. So that can be a big factor in terms of we get tripped up and then we label it as the dog is feral or the dog's got trauma. And it's not necessarily the case. It's just these dogs are put together differently. They see the world differently. They're impacted by the things we do, our behavior and the way we communicate a bit differently, especially if you know, in some cases, especially if you've had British dogs before. that can sometimes be make it a little bit more difficult because it doesn't work the same. Does that make sense?
So what I'm hearing from you is it's important that we don't try and live in a past that we don't know much about, actually, because that's important. And equally, that we don't project into a future that isn't here yet. We do have to see that dog. And this is why I love working with the overseas rescues, and also hearing people like yourself share this information, because it's almost the purest form of a dog-centric approach, really, because you kind of have to look at that. And also, I think it's really interesting what you say there about just because a dog's been through a lot of stuff doesn't mean that it was necessarily traumatizing for them. That dog in front of you who's acting in that kind of state could be just because they don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And a lot of their survival mode aspects are very finely tuned to stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are astutely environmentally aware in terms of not just the environment, but us as well. They're so clued into everything, and it's amazing and it's fascinating, but it's also what can cause problems for adopters, because they're quite literally street smart. They pick up on everything that, you know, they are learning, constantly learning from what's going on around them, and it can cause problems for sure.
Let's go into that a little bit, because I think this is interesting for us. When we know how much the different kind of circuits in the brain are from just general data collecting to that kind of potential threat evaluation circuit.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a while. The problem with that threat circuit is that, well, guess what? It's seeking threat. So it's not necessarily rational, and it's just looking at things that might be different or out of place. And we find that with dogs, even obviously UK dogs who are already in an anxious state or whatever. The things that need to be taken on board in a normal kind of sensory integrated way, there's a lot for these dogs before you even start, isn't there? You know, there's that graphic that goes around, even just looking at the outside of a property, you know, where they show all the different things the dog's got to think about. And it's quite powerful, because, you know, we're almost living in two different time streams, aren't we? As the caregiver, we're really excited. We've got this dog coming in. We want the dog to know we love you, and here's some food, and here's a bed. But share with us what you feel is probably the kind of outlook from the other side, from the dog's point of view.
Well, obviously, in terms of the dogs actually arriving, I think it's really essential to remember that no matter what, that transition from where they were to where they are with you is incredibly disorientating. I mean, quite a lot of them actually cope with it surprisingly well, you know, to be fair, but it is incredibly disorientating. It's confusing, no matter what their life was like before. And some of them have come from horrific circumstances and truly horrific circumstances. But no matter how bad that was, it was all that they knew. So even the transition to their wonderful new life with you can be equally as terrifying, because at least that was familiar. The threats almost were familiar, if you like. And what they experienced was familiar. So as awful as it was, it can be even more terrifying to have that trip away, to be taken away, to then find yourself in this place with all this stuff going on. We do it from, you know, a place of love and because we care and because we want things to be better, but we can tend to be just too full on with these dogs, even, you know, certainly when they first arrive, and even further down the line, to be fair, if we come across sticking points in terms of their transition into their new life, we can tend to be, you know, we spend an awful lot of time looking at them and talking to them. And even that, for these true, you know, deeply instinctive dogs, this person going, looking, talking at them, it's like, whoa, what's going on? You know, this is disconcerting, and it can be worrying. And we almost we try too hard instead of, I think the biggest thing for me, what I've learned from living with them, from working with them, is their need for time and space to just catch their breath in, and whether that's when they first arrive, or whether that's when you're working with, you know, through a problem, and whatever that problem may be, just slowing everything down and taking the time, or giving them the time to assess because if you think about instincts in nature in general, giving them even those few moments to go, okay, let me just get my bearings a second before the next thing happens. And that time to assess and that time to process can be incredibly valuable. Some of them, you know, need quite a lot of it, to be fair, especially when they first arrive, without someone trying to do this and do that, and then, you know, kick straight in with, let's do training. This dog needs training, and that they don't need any training. No, they really don't need any training right now. They just need to land, breathe, get their bearings, figure out what's what, find out who you are, what you're about. Are you trustworthy? Are you safe? Are you reliable? All that kind of stuff is really important. And for some of them, you know, even going, some of them can take time to build those relationships and develop that sense of trust in both their environment and the people they find themselves with. So I think it's, again, it comes back to that, you know, paying attention to who they are and how the world is affecting them. One of the big things I like to share with clients and talk about is Suzanne Clothier's elemental questions. They're all valuable, but the one in particular I try to just keep putting out there is, look at your dog and say to them, how is this for you? And stop and look for the answer. And I feel that that really helps them to naturally slow down and observe and pay attention, and not just be steaming through, oh, I want to do food, and I want to get you a bed, and let's see if you'll go in the garden, and let's try you with a lead and a collar, and let's do some training. Do you know what I mean? How is this for you? What is happening for you in this moment? And I kind of follow on from that to almost take it on to a different level. What is this like for you? And again, this is not just when they arrive. This is in terms of when we're working with them, when we're trying to work through problems with them that we're encountering, if they're having struggles with things, you know, across the spectrum of how they live with us, if you like. How is this for you is a fantastic question, but then also, what is this like for you? And asking that question so that, you know, we can actually pay attention to what they're telling us in terms of how it is for them. How does it feel? I mean, Champ is not, he was never a fearful dog. When he arrived, he was a teenager, Joy. And he was never super fearful, but he is very affected, more affected by the world around him than anything I've ever experienced. And you know, I've had a lot of dogs, and most of them were quite highly strung German Shepherds. But he is so affected by the world around him, by obviously me as well, my behavior. And I found it invaluable I spend half my time just stopping and going, okay, what's this like for you? What's happening for you? What's going on? And in asking that question, it naturally encouraged us to look for the answers in terms of how is this dog feeling about this situation, rather than us just shifting into let's do stuff. The statement that I came up with, or the phrase I came up with a long time ago, less doing, more being trumps doing. Let's just be in this moment. Let's just see where we're at, rather than let's do. Because when we're doing, we're not necessarily taking those moments to see how the dog is feeling, what it needs, and then obviously meeting those needs and looking for the observations that will tell us kind of which directions to go in for them as individuals. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really powerful, isn't it? So I think what I'm hearing from you there is the importance of seeing things almost as a kind of an invitation, really, and waiting for the feedback and recognizing what that looks like, and also recognizing that the answer might be different later. It might be different tomorrow, not just thinking, okay, we're okay now. What's also important there as well, is you mentioned this, is yes, the dog, you know, could be in a traumatized state. The dog could be fearful. These things are elements to think about.
Absolutely.
But also, and I think this can be hard, maybe harder in a way, because we can fall very easily behind some comfort thing. Oh, it's because the dog's fearful, so that kind of makes us feel better in a way, even though it's not good for the dog. But it could be because the dog's like, I don't want to. I'm not ready to yet. I don't want to do this with you yet. I'm not scared about it. I just don't want to do it yet.
Absolutely. And that is one of their most wonderful character traits, their independence. And the fact that they will speak up about what they want and what they don't want. And of course, it's not, sometimes they have to be able to do some of the things we need them to do from a safety point of view, or just because that's the world that we live in, unfortunately. So that there is always balance. But yes, these dogs definitely have that independence in terms of exactly that. I don't want to do that thing you're doing. And I think that is a place where certainly I came unstuck, and I know a lot of other people have come unstuck on the training side of things, because a lot of the way that we typically train, shall we say, these dogs they don't find it overly interesting to be a part of, if you like, especially if we shift into that rote repetition stuff and just keep doing the thing. You'll get a couple out of them and they'll be like, why have I got to keep doing this? And you can see, I mean, I see it in his face, like, I've done it, why do I have to keep doing it? So a big part of how I work with people is very much about, they're super smart. The majority of them, well, I don't think I've met one that isn't super smart in terms of cottoning onto stuff and picking stuff up really quickly. So you just kind of literally need a couple of sessions maybe at home of doing something, say like teaching a hand touch, which has been an invaluable one for me, certainly with my dogs and also with a lot of my clients. But then, they've got it in a couple of sessions, they've got it, take it on the road, integrate it into life. Don't keep standing there doing the repetitions and doing more of this. And even when you integrate it into life, again, don't kind of stand outside and keep doing those repetitions. It's like, be very focused on where can I utilize this thing I want to work on and build and reinforce, and then using it within those situations rather than thinking training sessions, if you like, because these dogs will kind of switch off quite quickly.
That's a really important, powerful point, isn't it? Because I found myself with working with clients that the more structured you make it, the more the dog can't get their head around it. The more you make it part of routine and ritual, they can get that, because it's like everyday stuff. I get the everyday stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. And that thing that you said before, actually, I just want to kind of pick up on again, because it is a really important part of living with these dogs. And it's something that I've definitely learned from living with them, working with them. And something I will say to clients when I'm working with them, and I've said it, anyone watching in my group will have heard me say this before. I will ask people, how different have you felt over the course of the last week? So going back to this aspect of things that impact on them in terms of how they feel, how they respond to us, how they might be into training or not, or whether they want to go for that walk or this walk or whatever. If you look at your life over the course of the last week, how did things affect you? Did you wake up exactly the same every day and feel exactly the same every day? And were you able to cope with everything the same every day? Were you the same person of every hour of every day over the last week? And people can then kind of think, well, yeah, no, I was up and down and here and there. And some days I was great and some days I was rubbish and I just didn't want to do this. It's not that much different for them. They don't necessarily come out the same day and feel the same way. And it's not even a case of trigger stacking. It can just be, almost like the little stuff that we experience can be very similar for them as well. Certainly, I see it in my boy a lot. There is no obvious reason sometimes for him being different, shall we say. It's not the big stuff, the trigger stacking stuff. It is just, I don't want to do that today. I said, okay, fine.
Yeah. The little things can
I don't want to do it either sometimes.
I've got a friend who's she can feel quite overwhelmed quite quickly. So if she goes to a conference or anything like that, she'll go a good couple of days before, because just being in a different environment is quite exhausting, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So none of the big stuff, it's not trigger stacking in the way that we would think about lots of big stuff. It's just, I need time to kind of connect to this environment first.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is that kind of stuff that is important to remember for these dogs as well, because that will definitely have the same kind of impact, and we tend to expect a lot of them, don't we? Our dogs, we tend to expect them to be able to do quite a lot and be okay with quite a lot of things that are actually really alien to them. So I think that's a really important and valuable point to remember, is that, things like that are exhausting, asking them to deal with new stuff, not just the big stuff, you know, vet visits or trips on holiday, or it's not just the big stuff. Sometimes it is the small stuff. And it can be just like, oh, that was a lot. I just could do with it, go and lay down now.
And actually, when you step back and plot things, you know, by being, because there's a theme here that you're talking about, which is trying to be present enough just to see how things move. A lot of people, I'm sure, will kind of it will sort of resonate for them. When the dog first comes, they seem to have an issue with a lot of stuff sometimes, but then suddenly they seem a little bit more relaxed when the washing machine's on. They don't seem to bother about the television so much. That shows an element of them having literally processed individual bits. And especially for those dogs who maybe haven't been in the home environment, either much or at all, there's a lot of stuff just by, you know, the big stuff could even be just going for a walk for them. That could be the big stuff. You know, we just see it as a walk around the block.
Yeah, no, it quite likely is big stuff. When you consider, and again, stepping into what is this like for you, that question for me encourages me to step into the dog's paws, if you like, and look at it from the dog's point of view. And if you just stop for a moment, especially the new arrivals more so than anything, but even you know, even further down the line, I'll come back to tramp, but certainly for the new arrivals, in terms of, you just imagine the sensory onslaught you get from literally just coming out the door. And I don't think, because we can't imagine it almost, I don't think people tend to appreciate what level that sensory onslaught can be for those dogs stepping out into the world, and with everything that's coming at them constantly in terms of the whole spectrum, you know, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're smelling, what they're feeling. And it is such a big thing. And I think, you know, it's definitely something that can cause problems for them in terms of how they then progress, because they are just trying to process so much all at once.
So if we put some of these things together, we've got a dog who's might be struggling to have a very efficient sensory integrated process initially, because there's a lot of stuff going on. They may well have been affected to a greater or lesser extent with even just the journey coming over, you know, let alone anything else. And they may have had times in their life where they felt deeply unsafe, and then they struggle with those things. And as you say, their natural instincts are more at the surface than you might find with a kind of dog that's come through a more domesticated system. Yep. Plus the fact that their survival brain is very tuned in and very kind of connected. Now we can see why there are some challenges about some of the received wisdoms about general training. Even this notion of we're going to dive in and do some counter conditioning here, we're going to do this desensitization here, because we were talking off air about you know, one of my clients I've just started working with, actually, who had that kind of approach initially, which was just, you know, if we kind of use the food and the dog started almost guarding a certain part of the house from other house members, not the primary caregivers who were part of that foundational safety. And you were saying that that's not uncommon, actually, to kind of see that kind of, well, I'll let you explain that a little bit as well. But actually then when we start adding in food, yep, to get the dog to do stuff because we think it's going to be good for them to do it, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong there, isn't there? I think from the dog's perception about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. And there's actually could go off like a spider's web with this one, to be fair, even down to with these dogs, bribing, trying to bribe them to do things, trying to lure them to do things, you know, the kind of things that generally work with dogs normally, people can come unstuck in taking this approach to achieve what they're trying to achieve, persuading them. It's often ineffective. And these dogs, because of that instinctive nature, that survival instinct that is close to the surface, that whole bribing, luring approach raises suspicion. It's like, why do you want me to do that? Why? So that in itself can cause a problem. And then obviously, again, that there are so many different aspects, but I know we spoke about before that the whole conflict that's created for the dogs who are, yes, you might be turning up and throwing the food and going away again, but if that dog has got issues around food, if you like, then yes, they want the food, but they still don't feel comfortable. Just because you've turned up and thrown it and gone away, they don't necessarily still feel comfortable. And it's important to understand communication is a big thing with these dogs. Being able to read the subtle communications, because a lot of them can be quite stoic. You know, a lot of people I know that they'll say to me, my dog's fine. I'm going, no, he's not doing a lot. I can see that you feel he's not doing anything and he's actually okay, but he's not. So it's being able to read them so that you can appropriately use food if it's right in that situation. But I must admit, my approach to most things will be focused on building the relationships, because that underpins everything with these dogs. If there isn't the relationship, if there isn't the trust, then obviously they never get into that state of, okay, I get it. They don't have the time to process through into, right, okay, I get it now. Do you know, if we're just doing the whole doing thing again. So it's about the relationship. It's about habituation, really, more so than that counter conditioning. How can we expose the dog to what's that concerning them or unsettling them or causing them an issue, if you like, within the parameters of what they determine is safe, but so that it's enough for them to have time with the exposure, but without, you know, actually having to do something. Even you know, getting the food is doing something. It's still a doing thing rather than an experience thing, if you like. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the dogs who, if they've had food deprivation, the food is just such a big issue for them. Their brain has gone bush, and then they're not actually not. There's no counting, conditioning, and desensitization going on because their brain's just going food, and that it blows their brain a little bit.
And actually, one of those key foundational aspects of safety, as well as the bond with the human, is to have a healthy relationship around food, because food is important, and we can weakly mess with that by attaching so much to the value of food.
Yeah. A lot of these dogs, certainly let's take the more or the less complicated ones, if you like. So I class Tramp as a less complicated dog in terms of, I mean, he had his own complications, if you like, but in terms of the dogs that I've worked with since, he is less complicated. But you know, he's not, yes, he is food motivated because they're all food motivated. Obviously from a survival point of view, but food was not something that he found reinforcing within a lot of the situations that he found worrying, shall we say. And it didn't matter what food you had. Yes, we worked through them and we could build up the value of food for sure. But even then, there were quite a lot of situations that required the whole experience, the exposure, if you like, with time and space to go, all right, okay, yeah, I'm okay with that. Do you know what I mean? Just that habituation thing, finding a way of how can I help you experience this thing, whether it's the actual thing, whether it's a version of the thing, whether it's a simulation of the thing. How can I help you experience this thing with time to go, oh, okay, yeah. And that kind of gets them there quicker than the food related. I mean, the food still helped even after the exposure. So things like horses took quite a long time for Tramp to be comfortable with horses. And to begin with, it was about finding a static trigger, if you like, so a field of horses where I could navigate it so that we could experience those horses. We could be in the vicinity at the right distance so that he could see them, he could experience them, he could smell them, he could hear them, but he wasn't obviously upset by them. There was no food involved. It was literally, we're just going to hang out here and watch these horses for a bit. If you want to sniff, you sniff. If you want to walk away, we'll walk away. But we're just going to visit this place and visit this place. And then once he'd kind of gotten to the point of, I don't actually need to panic about these things. They're not, you know, not going to kill me. Then yes, the food element has helped massively in terms of helping him to build proximity. And be able to have horses walking past him on country lanes and things like that. But initially, that initial helping to prevent him from going to instant freak out was very much done through that kind of habituation process.
And it has to be that, doesn't it? Because, you know, the wonderful Rachel Leather, who specialises in trauma and human and dog, she says you can't teach safety because the other has to feel it. You know, and I think we can fall into a false sense of security through the training bit sometimes.
Definitely.
We have three foundational aspects to safety, which is something I talk about in my stuff about processing, engagements, and exits. Because when you think about the foundational bits of feeling safe, you need to process stuff, and I, you know, and if you're coping quite well, that's probably happening subconsciously, you're not even recognizing it, but it's there. And then also having some choice over engagement and what that engagement looks like, and how you choose to engage, and knowing you can exit. I think a lot of the time, the engagements and exits are coming first a lot of the time. Even if the environment's too big for you, it's a form of engagement that you're not ready for yet. So it has to be processed in a way that that dog, like you said, can think, okay, I get that now. And over time, hoping that they'll generalize some of that. You alluded to this earlier, Meesh. I think it's such an important aspect. And I'm doing Karen Paneer's and Cope's Mira practitioner course at the moment. It's really fascinating how looking at mood state and how important it is, and looking at those kind of optimism biases or pessimism biases if we're in that kind of area. And we have to support that dog to shift through those mood states and do what they need to do. So we've talked about the importance of thinking about the different types of experiences all the different dogs have had, really. You know, they've all got a kind of a story to tell, and they're likely to be, some bits will be similar, but other bits will be very personal for them, and that's important for them that that's heard, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And
the importance of trying to support some kind of foundational safety for them by giving them things that they process and they feel safe in that process. And I think a lot of caregivers who have dogs from overseas, they kind of learn that the hard way, or they have their chance of listening to you and learn it up front. But I think at some point you're going to learn it. You're going to recognize that. What are the things then? I can't believe we're kind of whizzing along here. What kind of important aspects would you like to share to caregivers directly? If you could tell them some important things that they need to be mindful for, that you could equip them with, what would they be?
I think, as I've said, I think I've said a couple of times now, development of the relationship is literally the first place to start, in whatever way that looks like. You know, for some of the fearful dogs, it won't actually look like the development of a relationship at all. It will be that whole, you know, just hanging out kind of piece, exposure piece. But the relationship is fundamental with these dogs, because those instincts are quite close to the surface. When you start moving forward from wherever your starting point is, and you start perhaps dealing with the things like you know, reactivity on walks and stuff like that, if the relationship is not there, then the trust is not there. And if that's not there, the instincts would, again, they'll just come out. I'm not going to listen to, and all animals are like that. You know, we're like that as animals. If I find myself in you know, in a scary situation, and I'm with someone I don't trust, who maybe been unreliable in the past or inconsistent in the past, and I'm faced with a bear in front of me, I'm not going to listen to what they tell me to do because they've been unreliable and inconsistent. I'll be like, I'm just going to do what my instincts are telling me to do in this situation. So, and if you can imagine it from their point of view, in that respect, the relationship does become important, and it does take time for them to build the relationships. They're not going to just trust you because you feed them and give them wonderful beds and toys and things like that. The trust does have to be earned, and it comes through from that whole consistency, predictability, familiarity, the building of the relationship in the same way we build our relationships and develop that trust with people. Also, just slowing things down as much as possible. And I don't mean just slowing down in terms of what you do with them. And some of these dogs, like I say, they walk in the door like they've been there the whole lives. It's that not all of them land troubled or you know, with problems or even uncertain. I know of plenty of them who have arrived straight off the bus and gone, right, where's dinner? What are we doing? And they're absolutely fine. Like they've always been there. But even in terms of just how we expand their worlds and what we ask them to do, and we want them to go here and do that and everything else, just slowing down how we kind of do things with them in terms of asking those questions can just help us to check in with ourselves and with them in terms of how they're feeling, rather than just, again, assuming because the dog isn't having a big observable feeling about something that shows negativity, doesn't mean that there isn't a bit of like, oh, I'm a bit uncertain in this situation, I'm not quite sure. So, you know, having that, slowing that process down and just making sure that you check in with your dogs and just like, how are you doing with this? Is this okay for you? Can go a long way to preventing overstepping, overwhelming, asking too much too soon, which is when we tend to flip over then into problems. And obviously, again, for the survival instinct traits, once something has happened, that's logged in, then that, you know, that they've registered that now, and that's going to stick, and you've then got some unpicking to do to get them back to neutral and then back out to positive the other side. So prevention of those things is obviously preferable as much as possible, and slowing things down can be a great way of helping us to notice when we do need to perhaps advocate or support more. So that's definitely a big thing. And communication, like I say, these dogs are so astute, they're so tuned into everything. They're so clever at locking onto, I mean, their back chaining abilities are off the charts.
Yes.
So communication, learn to speak dog is the best way to put it. I saw I think it was a Facebook post, actually. I see so much, but I'm sure it was a Facebook post not too long ago, something about the Kennel Club had done some kind of survey, and 80% of people didn't understand or recognize subtle canine communications. And I can't say it's necessarily surprising as such, but you kind of think you take these animals into your home, even, and not just overseas dogs, this is all dogs, you know, they have the capability to do a serious amount of damage in 3 seconds or less. And yet people don't tend to go down the route of, I'm going to learn how you communicate with me. I need to know what you're saying to me. I need to know how you're feeling. So for me, the communication piece, both in terms of us being able to read them and also how we communicate with them, is just fundamental, because that's a big game changer in terms of us, you know, moving forward smoothly or getting a bit of a bumpy ride.
You know what, the one thing we can look at is, you've referenced that there a little bit, Meesh. I think we've been talking about overseas dogs, but this should be exactly the same formula that we have for every dog when you think about it.
Absolutely, yeah, nothing.
So,
I have people challenge me on this quite often when I'm doing posts, and they'll say, but this is the same for all dogs. And absolutely it is, you know, it is the same for all dogs. It's not just Romanian dogs, but this tends to come out more with these dogs because of that kind of fine tuning as such. But no, it's absolutely applicable. All of it's applicable to all dogs, really.
And I think that survey that you were talking about shows why it's important that we rethink a lot of things. This is why I love working with these dogs. I love hearing people like yourself who kind of specialize with them, because it is that purest form of a dog. You know, people say, what is a dog-centered approach? Well, with this type of dog, you will learn it.
Yeah.
I think because a lot of other dogs, we don't have to, because they are naturally very biddable, and they'll do our bidding, and they'll do things, and they'll do it. But that survey shows us that what's happened is, even though we've got a huge amount of dog training services now in the last 34 years, that the general public have been kind of convinced that the most important thing is a well-trained dog.
Yeah,
and actually, as a community,
my list in the order of kind of how I work with clients, and in my mind, the order of importance, the actual training is literally at the bottom of the list. It's like 6 or 7 down the list behind all the other stuff.
And it has to be, doesn't it? Because you can't learn unless you feel safe.
And you also can't learn effectively if the communication is not clear.
Yeah. So there's a lot from this for all. I think we can take anything from this, regardless of our relationship with our dogs, regardless of their heritage, their background, or anything. Really.
Absolutely.
For trainers, you know, we have to take some responsibility of thinking, what are we teaching in our classes and stuff? You know, the training is important, and it's not about not doing training, but we also need to be equipping that caregiver to be able to connect to their dog on a level of communication. I think that's just not just a one-way thing, because training can be a bit one way if we're not
Yeah,
careful.
no, absolutely. And that's definitely another big thing that Tramp has learned me, taught me, to listen. When he tells me, I believe him. You know, earlier on, I would question things. I'd be like, no, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Or I'd be like, let's just do this training thing. But I quite quickly learned to believe him when he tells me something, and it can be anything relative to perhaps he doesn't want to go a certain way. I don't always know the reason why, or he'll tell me something is there, or it will be his response to a place. And I've learned over the years to 100% believe him if he tells me something is not right, or he does not feel right about something, or something is concerning him. Because 9 times out of 10, once, you know, we kind of work through it, it will come clear as to what the issue was. And I'm like, that, like I say, I've kind of questioned it in the past, and every time he proves me wrong. You know, my border collie, she would blindly follow me anywhere without question and do anything, whereas he would be like, hang on a minute, not really sure about this. And I love that about him. I love that he has that, that he's taught me that. It's such a valuable thing for me in terms of not just my understanding of dogs in general, but also that relationship piece.
Well, do you know, when we've spoken before, the thing that really, well, a lot of things you say stick with me, Mish, but that thing about if your dog tries to tell you something, believe them. I'm writing a book at the moment, actually, which is long suffering, but I'm actually going to use that as a quote and quote you in it, because I think it's a wonderful thing. So I will, because I think it's a powerful statement. If your dog is trying to tell you something, believe them.
Yeah.
So we need that on a t-shirt for sure. Well, Mish, so this has been really amazing, and I really value everything you've said this evening, and the compassion and the thoughtful way that you approach this, really, and how much of a relief it must be for those people who find you in your group. Tell us a bit about your group, by the way. How can people find more Mish and hear the work that you do?
I obviously I have my website. I have my big community group on Facebook, which anyone is welcome to join. It's my name, and then it's called something else, but I think you've got links for it, haven't you? Or you will.
Yeah, I'll make sure I share links in the chat, and also we'll
so the big community group, there's lots of information in that group, in guides. There's lots of information that I've shared in there, useful information. And then on the website there are there's my adopters coaching group, which is like a membership group where we have a whole range of information, resources, and obviously qualified trainer support with people who are experienced with these dogs firsthand, but also working with them as well. And a lot of people do, you know, they come into the group and they do say, oh my God, I wish I found you right at the beginning when I first got my dog. I wouldn't have made the mistakes that I made. I can see what mistakes I made and why I ended up with problems. So yeah, that's the coaching group, which it's a really lovely space, and there's an absolute ton of information in there.
Well, you're always very generous with your knowledge and your experience, and that's something that comes out. And I think also to have those safe spaces for caregivers who want to dig a bit deeper and get that extra support, it's invaluable, really, because I call them expert caregivers, because
yes,
they really know their stuff. They've had to, so they know a lot of stuff, especially about the lived experience of the dog that shares the house with them. But caregiver burden, you know, it can be hard.
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the most valuable things about the community, because we get people come in who are getting that, like we spoke about at the beginning, that pressure from people to, you know, do this or do that or do things differently, and they're trying to advocate for their dogs, and they step into the group, into the space, and they are just so relieved that, you know, we're all sat there saying, no, it's fine, you don't have to take your dog for a walk, or no, you don't have to be forcing them to let you stroke them, or forcing them to wear a collar, or making them go out in the rain, or a lot of them don't like going out in the rain, and they do find that hugely relieving. And we do actually, because a lot of, you know, if you are having problems with these dogs, it can be incredibly overwhelming for the caregivers, for the adopters and for their families. And I have actually incorporated my dear friend and colleague, Janine Warman, who has Human Hound Healing. She works a lot with the emotional end for the humans. So dealing with that, you know, we feel angry. We feel, you know, we've let the dogs down. We can feel deflated. We can feel like a failure. And I've had lots and lots of people say all of those things to me. We can have, can't think of the word now. We can feel like the dogs are stopping us from doing things, regrets, or, you know, all of that human stuff, but we love the dogs. So, you know, I have Janine come in once a month to support the humans at the end of the lead, because it can be, as much as we love them, it can be a lot for people. And it's a really safe space I don't even join those calls, because I'm conscious that some people may not want to say stuff in front of me, but, you know, Janine comes in and those calls are there for people to just let go. You know, if you want to cry, if you want to shout, you want to vent. And I feel like that's an important element, because we can sometimes just bottle everything up, and then that doesn't help us or the dogs.
No, and even just being in a space where people can say, yeah, that's my dog, actually, or yeah, I've been through that. Because,
exactly.
And especially when we're surrounded by so many voices that, you know, sometimes professional ones actually, but often family members and friends who are just saying, well, if you just train the dog, everything will be all right.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, isn't it? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Some really lovely comments in the group. Thank you everybody for being here tonight, and thank you, Meesh, for offering us such wisdom here tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting
enjoyed
me.
it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been awesome.
Well, we'll make sure we share some links, so I can pop this into this chat now, and then when I put a header on the chat a bit later on, I'll do that, and then it'll be up on the YouTube channel. For those who don't know, we've got a YouTube channel where all the chats go up on. We've got 70+ chats now, Meesh. I don't know, it's crazy. Wow. Talking of, it is Wowzers, and actually it's been curated in such a great way. There's a lot of good stuff there, actually, if people want to deep dive on different topics with some amazing leaders in their field like yourself. The next Facebook Live is next Thursday, folks. That's the 5th, with Jack Fenton. So we're going to have another go at our last Facebook Live, which Facebook was reporting for scenes of nudity, Meesh. So I don't know what happened there. Yeah, very bizarre. And I had to kind of fight against a possible Facebook ban, but I can assure you we will have our clothes on. And then I'm having a holiday. I'm going away on holiday, Meesh. I can't wait. So I'm going to go away. So there won't be any more lives for a little bit while I have my holiday. But great. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are listening in. If you're listening in on YouTube, subscribe, because you can hear all the stuff. And I'm going to start doing some exclusive content just for YouTube soon. So keep an eye out for that. And thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks, Meesh.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Speak to you soon.
Bye.